Hi guys, and welcome to my channel. It's Jessica Manu. This is an ASMR reading of The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. Lord of the Rings Part 1. Okay, so anyway, we have been reading and we have actually completed chapter 1. And I'm just so happy and excited that we are now we're on chapter 2, guys. We made it. I want to talk about chapter 1 a little bit. I just found it to be really exciting. It's Bilbo's birthday party and he just does this whole extravaganza thing and with all the hobbits and invites them over and we learn about the ring and that it gives him like a little bit of special powers, but he doesn't know all the powers at the moment. He just knows that he can disappear and dash off. So that's very exciting. And I just really enjoyed chapter 1, or should I say I will be doing like a summarized detail situation of the whole thing, just to feel you in on the vibes and just to get it simplified, because sometimes you don't really want to listen to the whole thing, right? Maybe. But it's also just nice getting a simplified version of whatever it is you are reading. But now we're moving on to chapter 2. Shame, I've been saying that for a while now. And I think we'll begin. 1 second. Okay. Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Past. The talk did not lie down in 9 or 11 days. The talk did not lie down in 9. The talk did not lie down in 9 or even 99 days. The second disappearance of Mr. Bilbo Baggins was discussed in Hobbiton, and indeed all over the Shire, for a year and a day, and was remembered much longer than that. It became a fireside story for young hobbits, and eventually Mad Baggins, who used to vanish with a bang and a flash and reappear with bags of jewels and gold, became a favourite character of legend and lived on long after the true events were forgotten. But in the meantime, the general opinion in the neighbourhood was that Bilbo, who had always been rather cracked, had at last gone quite mad and had run off into the blue. There he had undoubtedly fallen into a pool or a river and came to a tragic but hardly an untimely end. The blame was mostly laid on Gandalf. If only that dratted wizard would leave young Frodo alone, perhaps he would settle down and grow some hobbit sense, they said. And to all appearance the wizard did leave Frodo alone. And he did settle down, but the growth of hobbit sense was not very noticeable. as well. Indeed, he had at once begun to carry on Bilbo's reputation for oddity. He refused to go into mourning. The next year he gave a party in honor of Bilbo's 112th birthday, which he called a 100-weight feast. But that was short of the mark, for 20 guests were invited, and there were several meals at which snowed food and rained drink, as hobbits say. Some people were rather shocked, but Frodo kept up the custom of giving Bilbo's birthday party year after year, until they got used to it. He said that he did not think Bilbo was dead. When they asked, "Where is he then?" he shrugged his shoulders. Lived alone, as Bilbo had done, but he had many friends, especially among the younger hobbits, mostly descendants of the old Took, who had, as children, been fond of Bilbo and had often in and out of Bag End. Volkerbuffen and Friediger Bulger were two of these, but his closest friends were Peregrine Took, usually called Pippin, and Merry Brandybuck. His real name was Meriadoc, but that was seldom remembered. Frodo went tramping over the Shire with them, but more often he wandered by himself, and to the amazement of sensible folk, he was sometimes seen far from home, walking in the hills and the woods under the starlight. Merry and Pippin suspected that he visited the elves at times, as Bilbo had done once. As time went on, people began to notice that Frodo also showed signs of good preservation. Outwardly, he retained the appearance of a robust and energetic hobbit just out of his tweens. Some folk have all the luck, they said, but it was not until Frodo approached the usually more sober age of 50 that they began to think it queer. Frodo himself, after the first shock, found that being his own master and the Mr. Baggins of Bag End was rather pleasant. For some years he was quite happy and did not worry much about the future, but half unknown to himself the regret that he had not gone with Bilbo steadily growing. He found the wild lands, strange visions of mountains that he had never seen come into his dreams. He began to say to himself, "Perhaps I shall cross the river myself one day," to which the other half of his mind always replied, "Not yet." So it went on, until his 40s were running out and his 50th birthday was drawing near. 50 was a number that he felt was somehow significant or ominous. It was at any rate, at that age, that adventure had suddenly befallen Bilbo. Frodo began to feel restless, and the old paths seemed too well trodden. He looked at maps and wondered what lay beyond their edges. Maps made in the Shire showed mostly white spaces beyond the borders. He took to wandering further afield, and more often by himself and Merry, and his other friends watched him anxiously. Often he was seen walking and talking with strange wayfarers that began at this time to appear in the Shire. There were rumors of strange things happening in the world outside, as Gandalf had not at that time appeared or sent any message for several years. Frodo gathered all the news he could. Elves who seldom walked in the Shire could now be seen passing westward through the woods in the evening. Passing and not returning, but they were leaving Middle-earth and were no longer concerned with his troubles. There were, however, dwarves on the road in usual numbers. The ancient east-west road ran through the Shire to its end at the grey havens, and dwarves had always used it in their way to their mines in the Blue Mountains. They were the hobbits' chief source of news from distant parts, if they wanted any. As a rule, dwarves said little, and hobbits asked no more. But now Frodo often met strange dwarfs of far countries seeking refuge in the west. They were troubled, and some spoke in whispers of the enemy in the land of Mordor. That name the hobbits only knew in legends of the dark past, like a shadow in the background of their memories, but it was ominous and disquieting. It seemed that the evil power in Mirkwood had been driven out by the White Council, only to reappear in greater strength in the old strongholds of Mordor. The Dark Tower had been rebuilt, it was said. From there, the power was spreading far and wide, and away far east, south, where wars, growing fear. Orcs were multiplying again in the mountains. Trolls were abroad, no longer dull-witted, but cunning and armed with dreadful weapons. And there were murmured hints of creatures more terrible than all these, but they had no name. Little all of this, of course, reached the ears of ordinary hobbits, but even the deafest and most stay-at-home began to hear queer tales, and those whose business took them to the But even the deafest and most stay-at-home began to hear queer tales, and those whose business took them to the borders saw strange things. The conversation in the Green Dragon at Baywater one evening in the spring of Frodo's 50th year showed that even in the comfortable heart of the Shire rumours had been heard. Showed that even in the comfortable heart of the Shire rumours had been heard. Though most hobbits still laughed at them, Sam Gamgee was sitting in one corner near the fire, and opposite him was Ted Sandyman, the miller's son. And there were various other rustic hobbits listening to their talk. "Queer things you do hear these days, to be sure," said Sam. "Ah," said Ted, "you do if you listen, but I can hear fireside tales and children's stories at home if I want to." "No doubt you can," retorted Sam. "And dearestly, there's more truth in some of them than you reckon." Who invented the stories anyway? Take dragons now. "No, thank said Ted. "I won't. I heard tell of them when I was a youngster." Wow. No, thank said Ted. "No, thank said Ted. heard tell of them when I was a youngster. I won't. I heard tell of them when I was a youngster, but there's no call to believe in them now. There's only one dragon in Baywater, and that's green, he said, getting a general laugh. All right, said Sam, laughing at the rest. But what about these tree men, these giants, as you might call them? They do say that one bigger than a tree was seen up away beyond North Moors not long back. Who's they? My cousin Hall, for one. He works for Mr. Boffin at Overhill and goes up the north farting for the hunting. He saw one. Says he did. Perhaps Hall's always saying he's seen things, and maybe he sees things that aren't there. But this one was as big as an elm tree, and walking 7 yards to a stride. If it was an inch, then I bet it wasn't an inch. What he saw was an elm tree, as like as not. But this one was walking, I tell you, and there ain't no elm tree in North Moors. Then Hall can't have seen one, said Ted. There was some laughing and clapping. The audience seemed to think that Ted had scored a point. All the time, said Sam. You can't deny that others besides our half-fast have seen queer folk crossing the Shire. Crossing it, mind you. There are more that are turned back at the borders. The bounders have not been so busy before. And I've heard tell that the elves are moving west. They do say they're going to the harbours, out away beyond the white towers. Sam waved his arm vaguely. Neither he nor any of them knew how far it was to the sea. Past the old towers, beyond the western borders of the Shire. But it was an old tradition that away over there stood the grey heavens, from which at times elven ships set sail, never to return. They're sailing over the sea. They're going into the west and leaving us, said Sam, half chanting the words, shaking his head sadly, solemnly. But Ted laughed. Well, that isn't anything new, if you believe old tales, and I don't see what it matters to me or you. Let them sail. But I warrant you haven't seen them doing it, nor anyone else in the Shire. Well, I don't know, said Sam thoughtfully. He believed he had once seen an elf in the woods and still hoped to see more one day. Of all the legends that he had heard in his early years, such fragments of tales and half-remembered stories about the elves as the hobbits knew had always moved him most deeply. There are some, even in these parts, as you know, the fair folk can get news of them, he said. There's Mr. Baggins now, that I work for. He told me that there was sailing, and he knows a bit about elves. And old Mr. Bilbo knew more. Many's the talk I had with him when I was a little lad. Oh, they both cracked, said Ted. Leastways, old Bilbo was cracked, and Frodo's cracking. If that's where you get your news from, you'll never want for moonshine. Well, friends, I'm off home. Your good health. He drained his mug and went out noisily. Sam sat silent and said no more. He had a good deal to think about. For one thing, there was a lot to do up in the Bag End garden, and he would have a busy day tomorrow if the weather cleared. The grass was growing fast, but Sam had no more in his mind than gardening. After a while, he sighed and got up and went out. It was early April, and the sky was now clearing after heavy rain. The sun was dawn. The sun was down, and the cool, pale evening was quietly fading into night. He walked home under the early stars through Hobbiton and up the hill, whistling softly and thoughtfully. It was just at that time that Gandalf reappeared after his long absence. For 3 years after the party, he had been away. Hey guys, so we are still very busy reading. Let me see. I thought we were halfway chapter 2, but not quite. We still have quite a bit we're reading. Anyway, this is how much chapter 2 is, and let's see how quickly we can get that going. Anyway, some water break. Let's continue. It was just at this moment that Gandalf reappeared after his long absence. For 3 years after the party, he had been away. Then he paid Frodo a brief visit, and after taking a good look at him, he went off again. During the next year or two, he had turned up fairly often, coming unexpectedly after dusk and going off without warning before sunrise. He would not discuss his own business and journeys, and seemed chiefly interested in small news about Frodo's health and doings. Then suddenly his visits had ceased. It was over 9 years since Frodo had seen or heard of him, and he had begun to think that the wizard would never return and had given up all interest in hobbits. But that evening, as Sam was walking home and twilight was fading, there came the once familiar tap on the sturdy window. Frodo welcomed his old friend with a surprise and great delight. They looked hard at one another. "All well, said Gandalf. "You look the same as ever, Frodo." "So do you," Frodo replied. Secretly, he thought that Gandalf looked older and more careworn. He pressed him for news of himself and of the wide world, and soon they were deep in talk, and they stayed up far into the night. Next morning, after the late breakfast, the wizard was sitting with Frodo by the open window of the study. A bright fire was on the hearth. The sun was warm, and the wind was in the south. Everything looked fresh, and the new green of spring was simmering in the fields and the tips of the tree fingers. Gandalf was thinking of spring. Nearly 8 years before, when Bilbo had run out the bag end without them. Gandalf was thinking of a spring. Nearly 8 years before, when Bilbo had run out of bag end without a handkerchief. Without a handkerchief. His hair was perhaps whiter than it had been then. His hair was perhaps whiter than it had been then, and his beard and eyebrows were perhaps longer, and his face more lined with care and wisdom. But his eyes were as bright as ever, and the smoked and blue smoke rings with the fine was more lined with care and wisdom. But his eyes were as bright as ever, and he smoked and blew smoke rings with the same vigour and light. He was smoking now in silence, for Frodo was sitting still, deep in thought. Even in the light of morning, he felt the dark shadow of the tidings that Gandalf had brought. At last he broke silence. Last night you began to tell me strange things about my ring, Gandalf, he said. And then you stopped, because you said that such matters were best left until daylight. Don't you think you had better finish now? You say the ring is dangerous, far more dangerous than I guess. In what way? In many ways, answered the wizard. It is far more powerful than I ever dared to think at first. So powerful that in the end it would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it. It would possess him. In Eregion, or Eregion, I think it's Eregion. In Eregion, long ago, many elven rings were made, magic rings as you call them, and they were, of course, of various kinds, some more potent and some less. The lesser rings were only essays in the craft before it was full grown, and to the elven smiths they were but trifles, yet still to my mind dangerous for mortals. But the great rings, the rings of power, they were perilous. A mortal, Frodo, who keeps one of great rings does not die, but he does not grow or obtain mortal life. He merely continues until at last every minute is a weariness. And if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. And he often uses the ring to make he becomes, in the end, invisible permanently, and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yes, sooner or later, if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strong nor good purpose will last, sooner or later the dark power will devour him. Yes, sooner or later, if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last. Sooner or later, the dark power will devour him. How terrifying, said Frodo. There was another long silence. The sound of Sanghamji cutting lawn came in from the garden. How long have you known this? Asked Frodo at length. And how much did Bilbo know? Bilbo knew no more than he told you, I'm sure, said the Gandalf. He would certainly never tell you he passed it on to you. He would certainly never have passed on to you anything that he thought would be a danger, even though I promised to look after you. Just going to pick up where we left off. actually don't know where we left off. Let's just... Okay, that was a bit of a rough patch there. But yeah, let's just continue reading. It should be okay. Where were we? Promise to look after you, right? He thought the ring was very beautiful and very useful at end. And if anything was wrong or queer, it was himself. He said that it was growing on his mind. And he was always worrying about it, but he did not suspect that the ring itself was to blame, though he had found out that the thing needed looking after. It did not seem always of the same size or weight. It shrank or expanded in an odd way and might suddenly slip off his finger where it had been tight. Yes, he warned me of that in his last letter, said Frodo, so I have always kept it on its charm. So I have always kept it on its chain. Very wise, said Gandalf. But as for his long life, Bilbo never connected it with the ring at all. He took all the credit for that to himself, and he was very proud of it. Though he was getting restless and uneasy, thin and stretched, he said, a sign that the ring was getting control. How long have you known all of this? Asked Frodo again. Known, said Gandalf. I have known much that only the wise know, Frodo. But if you mean know about this ring, well, I still do not know, one might say. There is a last test to make, but I no longer doubt my guess. When did I first begin to guess? He mused, searching back in memory. Let me see. It was in the year that the White Council drove the Dark Power from Mirkwood, just before the Battle of the Five Armies, that Bilbo found his ring. A shadow fell on my heart then, though I did not know yet what I feared. I wondered often how Gollum came by a great ring. As plainly as it was, that at least was clear from the first. Then I heard Bilbo's strange story of how he had worn it, and I could not believe it. When I at last got the truth out of him, I saw at once that he had been trying to put his claim to the ring beyond doubt. Much like Gollum with his birthday present. The lies were too much alike for my comfort. Clearly the ring had an unwholesome power that set to work on its keeper at once. That was the first real warning I had, that all was not well. I told Bilbo often that such rings were better left unused, but he resented it and soon got angry. There was little else I could do. I could not take it from him without doing greater harm, and I had no right to do so anyway. I could only watch and wait. I might perhaps have consulted Saruman. I could only watch and wait. I might perhaps have consulted Saruman, the White, but I might perhaps have consulted Saruman, the White, but something always held me back. Who is he? Asked Frodo. I've never heard of him before. Maybe not, answered Gandalf. Hobbits are, or were, no concern of his. Yet he is great among the wise. He is the chief of my order and the head of council. His knowledge is deep, but his pride has grown with it, and he takes ill any meddling. The lore of the elven rings, great and small, his province is his province. He has long studied it, seeking the lost secrets of their making. But when the rings were debated in the council, all that he would reveal to us of this ring lore told against my fears. So my doubts slept, but uneasily. Still I watched and I waited. And all seemed well with Bilbo, and the years passed, yes, they passed, and they seemed not to touch him. He showed no signs of age, the shadow fell on me again. But I said to myself, after all, he comes for a long-lived family on his mother's side. There is time yet, wait. And I waited until the night when he left his house. He said and did things then that filled me with fear that no words of Saruman could allay. I knew at last that something dark and deadly was at work, and I have spent most of the years since then in finding out the truth of it. There wasn't any permanent harm done, was there? Asked Frodo anxiously. He would get all right in time, wouldn't he? Be able to rest in peace, I mean? Okay, let us continue reading. Okay, we're back. He felt better at once, said Galdon. But there is only one power in this world that knows all about the rings and their efforts. And as far as I know, there's no power in the world that knows all about hobbits. Among the wise, I am the only one that goes in for hobbit lore, an obscure branch of knowledge, but full of surprises. Soft as butter they can be, and yet sometimes as tough as old tree roots. I think it likely that some would resist the rings far longer than most the wise would believe. I don't think you need worry about Bilbo. Of course, he possessed the ring for many years and used it, so it might take a long while for the influence to wear off before it was safe for him to see it again, for instance. Otherwise, he might live on for years, quite happily just stop as he was when he parted with it. For he gave it up in the end of his own accord, an important point. No, I was not troubled about dear Bilbo any more once he had let the ring go. It is for you that I felt responsible. Ever since Bilbo left, I have been deeply concerned about you and about all the things and about all these charming, absurd, helpless hobbits. It would be a grievous blow to the world if the dark power overcame the Shire. If all your kind, jolly, stupid bulgars, hornblowers, boffins, brace girdles, and the rest, not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses, became enslaved. Frodo shuddered. But why would we be? He said. And why would we want such slaves? To tell you the truth, replied Gandalf, I believe that hetero, mark you, he has entirely overlooked the existence of Bobbin. of hobbits. You should be thankful, but your safety has passed. He does not need you. He has many more useful servants, but he won't forget you again, and the hobbits, as miserable slaves, would please him far more than hobbits happy and free. There is such a thing as malice and revenge. Revenge? Said Frodo. Revenge for what? I still don't understand what all this has to do with Bilbo and myself and our ring. It has everything to do with it, said Gandalf. You don't know the real peril yet, but you shall. I was not sure of it myself when I was last there, but the time has come to speak. Give me the ring for a moment. Frodo took it from his breeches pocket, where it had clasped to a chain that hung from his belt. He unfastened it and handed it slowly to the wizard. It felt suddenly very heavy, as if either it or Frodo himself was in the same, reluctant for Gandalf to touch it. Gandalf held it up. It looked to be made of pure and solid gold. Can you see them? Can you see any markings on it? He asked. No, said Frodo. There are none. It is quite plain, and it never shows a scratch or a sign of wear. Well, then look. To Frodo's astonishment and distress, the wizard threw it suddenly into the middle of a glowing corner of the fire. Into the middle of a glowing corner of the fire. Frodo gave a cry and groped for the tongs, but Gandalf held him back. Wait, he said. Wait, he said in a commanding voice, giving Frodo a quick look from under his resting brows. No apparent change came over the ring. After a while, Gandalf got up, closed the shutters outside the window, and drew up the curtains. The room became dark and silent, though the clack of Sam's shears, now nearer the windows, could still be heard faintly from the garden. For a moment the wizard stood looking at the fire, then he stooped and removed the ring to the earth with the tongs, and at once picked it up. Frodo gasped. It is quite cool, said Gandalf. Take it. Frodo received it in his shrinking palm. It seemed to have become thicker and heavier than ever. Hold it up, said Gandalf, and look closely. As Frodo did so, he now saw fine lines, finer than the finest pen strokes, running along the ring outside the insides, lines of fire that seemed to form the letters of a flowing script. They shone piercingly bright and yet remote, as if out of a great depth. Okay guys, there's a lot going on right here. I can't actually read what's written here, but I'm going to show it to you. That over there is what we're looking at. Anyway, whatever that says. I cannot read the fiery letters, said Frodo in a quivering voice. Well, neither can I, Frodo. We are together in this. No, said Gandalf, but I can. The letters are Elvish, of an ancient mode, but the language is that of Mordor, which I will not utter here, but this is the common tongue, is what is said close enough. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. It is only 2 lines of a verse long, known in elven lore. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sun, 7 for the dwarf lords, in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne. In the land of Mordor where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all. 1 ring to find them all. 1 ring to bring them all. In the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. He paused and then said slowly in a deep voice, "This is the master ring, the ring." He paused and said slowly in a deep voice, "This is the master ring, the 1 ring to rule them all. This is the 1 ring that he lost many years ago to the great awakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it." Frodo sat silent and motionless. Fear seemed to stretch out a vast hand, like a dark cloud rising in the east and looming up to engulf him. "This ring," he stammered. How on earth did it come to me?" "Ah," said Gandalf, "this is a very long story. The beginning lies back to the black years, which only the lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we should still be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. But last night I told you of the Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord. The rumors that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again and left his hold in Mirkwood and returned to his ancient fastness in the dark tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories, always after a defeat and a respite. The shadow takes another shape and grows again. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf. And so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have, but that is not wrong. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We shall be hard put to it. We should be very hard put to it. Even if it were not for this dreadful chance. The enemy still lacks one thing to give him strength and knowledge to beat down all resistance, break the last defenses, and cover all the lands in the second darkness. He lacks the 1 ring. The 3 fairest of all elf lords hid from him, and his hand never touches them or sullied them. Even the dwarf king possessed. But 3 he has recovered, and the others the dragons have consumed. 9 he gave to mortal men, proud and great, and snared them. Long ago they fell under the domination of the 1, and they became ring wraiths. I think it's wraiths. And they became ring wraiths. Shadows under great shadow. His most terrible servants, long ago, it is many a year since the 9 walked abroad. Yet who knows, as the shadow grows once more, they too may walk. But come, We will not speak of such things. But come, we will not speak of such things even in the morning of the Shire. Okay. Okay, guys. We're gonna call it quits. We're not gonna call it quits, but okay, we are calling it quits. But what I mean by that is we have come to the end of today's reading. And anyway, I hope this has been amazing for you all. I hope this has helped you relax and fall asleep or take a nap if need be, or even just sleep one time. Just trying to see exactly where this ends. Quite a bit of wind. Okay, I'm trying to figure it out, but it's just okay. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and being with me through this reading. I've got this little marker just to make sure that we don't go off stray. We don't go off stray, and I'll see you in our next reading. And I just hope that you can relax and fall asleep. And I hope you've enjoyed this reading. And of course, I'll see you soon. And that's a wrap. And good night. And I'll see you soon.